welcome to the next video of our International Women's Day 2025 video series. I'm Sheryl Cuisia, and I'm super excited to be talking about the theme for this year's IWD, which I mentioned in my last video to be Accelerate Action. So this sings very much to me, as I've said before, because I've spent the last 3 years pretty much theorizing, working really hard, researching, analyzing, engaging as much as I can on inclusive investor engagement and essentially trying to positively influence listed companies in doing the right thing and incorporating retail shareholder engagement in their ongoing investor relations. Well, that hasn't gone very well. I have tried everything to make retail shareholder engagement as appealing as possible, but unfortunately, it hasn't been something that companies wanted to do voluntarily, which is so sad. Especially given the state of UK capital markets today. Essentially, the very small amount of IPOs, only 18 last year, the continuous outflow of institutional investment over the last 5 years, and then also direct retail share ownership now only being 11% of all UK equities, which is significantly down to 54% in the 1960s. And then also, if we compare this, our statistics, retail shareholder statistics with the US, essentially only 20% of the UK adult population invest directly in UK equities, whereas in the States, the statistics are 60% of the adult population. Now, the key simple difference to explain the disparity is actually engagement. In the US, American companies are required to notify their retail shareholders of things like annual general meetings. And they also have very high quorum. So in order for an AGM to go ahead in the States, they need at least 50% plus one of the issued share capital to vote in order for that to count as quorum for the meeting to go ahead. Whereas in the UK, as we know, quorum is two members. So you can see the big difference. And I think culturally, which has already been talked about so much by various different people, there's a mindset difference. But for me, as someone who literally has been pounding the pavement and basically having so much skin on the game in terms of having worked for 20 years, including founding my own shareholder engagement and corporate governance consultancy, and then selling that 6 years ago to a FTSE 250 company, which is one of the major registrars in the UK. And then basically, instead of just chilling out, I've actually been working much more on trying to sort out this matter related to inclusive shareholder engagement and trying to influence companies positively in a constructive way rather than being activist. And then actually ending up spending my own capital to fund all of these endeavors, particularly over the last 2 years, following the formalization of T, the engagement appeal, into a startup social venture. So it has been quite the adventure with lots of interesting learnings and mistakes that costed quite a lot, but actually are really valuable lessons in terms of what brings us here today and how to move forward, and the importance of intergenerational collaboration. Because a big lesson I learned throughout the process of setting up T and running it over the last 2 years is that, in fact, I was being extremely Gen X in my method of setting up the organization. Essentially, what worked with my last company, I thought I would just replicate it, because why not, right? So our client base at the last company, my client base at my last company, which is called Boudica Proxy Consultants, which became Boudica from Equinity. Essentially, I worked on about 500 shareholder engagement and proxy solicitation campaigns, largely for UK PLCs, some cross-border, and of course, activist hedge funds like Elliott's and PEs, especially for takeovers. And so then, when I founded Boudica in late 2011, essentially I set it up in the way that I did, and basically in setting up T, over a decade later, there had been so many technological advances, and I had actually spent about a year at Cambridge as their inaugural entrepreneur in residence at King's College, Cambridge, where there's an amazing entrepreneurship program, which was started by a brilliant guy Malcolm McKenzie, who is one of the most senior guys at Alvarez Marcel, who I find incredibly inspiring. And essentially, he came along and worked with King's and set up an entrepreneurship lab. And then the following year, Lord David Sainsbury thought, this is brilliant, and he began contributing too. Anyway, so over my time at King's, I ended up meeting all these Gen Zs, these 19-year-olds, these 20-year-olds, these 21-year-olds. I don't have children, and so I don't really have much exposure every day to younger people. Certainly when I ran Boudica, we had a lot of amazing graduates who learned a lot about the ways of the city, but my time in Cambridge actually allowed me to learn so much about this next generation. So I was meant to be informally mentoring them, but essentially what also happened was they ended up informally mentoring me. So I carried quite a lot of what I learned in my time at King's, but then I don't think I necessarily applied my learning into practice, because essentially I could have done quite a lot of the early T stuff as probably a content creator and influencer. But Gen X, and I guess city people, maybe we have this mentality of, oof, we're too professional, we're too good to be a content creator, an influencer. We're professionals. But actually, that's not the right mindset. I could have saved myself a lot of hassle and pain and time and £500,000 by probably being a content creator and YouTuber and just being authentic and sharing my experience and thoughts in an imperfect way, but still compliant. So that was an interesting and hard lesson to learn, but it's great to have learned it. And then also another lesson I learned is even someone who is considered successful or a good entrepreneur can still be financially illiterate and not understand every single financial product, and then can decide to take out a financial product because their assets are largely illiquid, and then ending up with this product that costs them, insane amounts of money that then causes so much stress because of the embarrassment of not fully understanding what they signed up to, and then not being able to talk about the issues that they have encountered because of embarrassment, because of the feeling that society expects that, oh, you should know that because you're supposed to be successful and smart. So essentially, the last 3 years have been an interesting journey. And even before these last 2 years, the year before was my crash course on corporate governance-ish and non-executive directorship in action. So essentially after Boudica and COVID, my life changed because I exited the business, and probably just so many life changes in terms of having parted with something I built for many years, and then having to go through lockdown, and basically it was just me in my apartment and my dog, and I had made a decision about relationships before lockdown, and basically there were just so many things, so many changes, but one of the things I decided to do, because I was approached, was to take on the role of the chair of a UK shareholder association. So at that time, 3 years ago, I was 43. I would have been old enough, right, to know better, and 20 years under my belt, advising on proxy solicitations, shareholder engagement campaigns, had a corporate advisory team, advised on that too. And basically, all of that theory obviously was not enough to actually protect me from the practicalities of a voluntary board dynamic. So I guess what I want to say is all of that theoretical knowledge, or all of that knowledge and practice that I undertook in running campaigns, advising clients, does not equate to being a good board director, or equipping one with everything they need to deal with difficulties and challenges that may be unfair in a boardroom dynamic, especially when the directors involved are all voluntary, as you would say here in the UK, and unpaid. So without going into too much detail, because after 3 years of holding these issues in, because I preferred to actually just move on rather than going legal or being annoying and vindictive, because what's the point in wasting energy when that energy could be used in so many positive ways? Basically, I just decided to move on, but it was really important that I articulated what happened in that chapter of my life and other people's lives, because when I stepped down from this shareholder association, 5 others also stepped down. So essentially, what I learned from my situation as then a 43-year-old first-time non-exec director, first-time chair, is that number one, I have to do better diligence. I have to do proper due diligence. So I have to ask the right questions. I have to look at the organization itself, the composition of the board, the organization, the dynamics, the different people. And then I also have to learn the difference between executive and non-executive. And clearly, I think I probably did not fully grasp that yet. And then I think it takes time. But then I guess to my defense, essentially it's voluntary. My mandate was to be young, fresh, ethnic, diverse, whatever else, female, and transform the organization. And I really took that very seriously and put in about 40, 50 hours a week. But then that was basically interpreted by the people who were largely at least 2 decades or so older than me and men. It was taken as, oh, she is dictatorial, or she's too forceful, and they didn't like that. And is that right? You know, I don't think it's right, but at the same time, I guess people feel threatened and they don't like to feel that way. And I guess for myself, when all of this was happening, when I took on this role, I mean, it doesn't compare to National Grid, but at that time, the former chair of National Grid, Sir Peter Gershon, was stepping down, and basically it was already announced that Paula Rasput Reynolds, this brilliant Ned who won the non-executive director award for FTSE 100 2 years ago, basically was appointed to be the successor to Sir Peter Gershon. And I really just admired how the transition went, because Paula joined as a Ned first, and then after 3 months with Sir Peter, she then took on the role of chair, and then he fully left the board. So that kind of stewardship and support must mean a lot to people and essentially set someone up for success. Unfortunately, that did not happen to me, and I should have probably asked better questions, because at this organization, the chair decided that he would stay on the board. And I thought, okay, that's strange. That's not really good governance. If I was advising a listed company with a director, a former chair who wants to stay on the board, I'd say, look, that's not good practice. And in practical terms, too, it will be hard for the new chair, because they will always feel like they're being undermined, or that they're splitting the loyalties of the group. But in any case, I proceeded with this, and then things happened, and I did ask several times, please, could you step down, because this is making things really hard for me, but that didn't happen. And I should have known from the very beginning that maybe me being a successor to this former chair was never going to work out, because maybe for personality reasons, I think someone who doesn't have a strong, what's the word, maybe someone who is not formidable, is that fair to say? Or someone who is just willing to be quiet, is probably what they were looking for. But I really wanted to do my job, even though I wasn't paid for it. It was entirely voluntary and putting in so many hours. But what I signed up to was to transform this old organization into a 21st century intergenerational hub. But after 6 months, 3 months of which I was chair, I stepped down. And I never liked to quit, but I consulted with many respectable non-exec directors and people I respect, who have been clients who then became friends. And basically I asked them, look, this is my situation, and explained to them that literally I had it just consumed me, and it was really hard for myself, and also my partner at the time, who has serious health issues, and basically the best advice that I heard was, look, Sheryl, a good non-exec director always knows when to throw in the towel and when to fight their corner. So which situation are you in? And that meant a lot to me. And they also said that quitting does not mean that you have lost. It means that you're being smart about your time and your energy. And that made me even doubly confident, more confident in the decision. So this was a towel situation. But essentially, the point here is that it's always important to hold on to the energy that you got and to use that for positive. If something doesn't work out, it probably wasn't meant to work out, especially if you tried everything that you could. And then in terms of moving on, I think there's no point in being vindictive. Certainly, I am not shy in retiring, and I will call things out. But I think in this situation, I wanted so much to just move on, but I never publicly explained what happened. And I think there was an expectation that I was going to do something, or at least be public about the fallout, etc. But I just kept it in. And that also is not very good, because for 3 years I kept it in, and just trying to focus on moving forward. But if something does not go well and there are real transgressions or issues, you must vocalize them and confront the situation, or else those issues will continue happening. And essentially that's what I saw continue to happen. And how this relates to UK capital markets and retail shareholders is, well, this country really needs retail shareholders, individual investors, those who hold directly and through nominees, to participate in the regeneration of our once great UK capital markets. And because there's so many individuals that comprise that unit, it is important that there is strong leadership and strong organizations who can represent the diverse voices. But if that leadership has issues and is unable to actually conform or comply with best practice that is expected of market participants, particularly issuing companies, etc., it's really hard to then support them and take them seriously. And essentially, what happens too is that the intentions are not correct, and are focused largely on things like aggrandizement or praise in place of a financial reward, then that causes conflicts, and also lots of confusion and friction between people who should really be working together rather than against each other. So essentially, at this juncture, especially given the fact that it was International Women's Day, which we're now continuing into International Women's Week, and it's been 3 years, and the theme of International Women's Day this year is accelerate action. It's now time to do that. I've had time to work like crazy, to research, to analyze, to engage as much as I can, make loads of mistakes, learn new ways of doing things, learn how to be humble, and learn from younger people. It's now time to act. So theorizing, which I actually think a lot of smart people do in the city, they theorize about retail shareholders, as opposed to deeply understanding and being a retail shareholder, not remembering that every single one of us is a retail shareholder. So if you're over the age of 21 and you work full-time and make at least £10,000 a year, or you work and make at least £10,000 a year, you're automatically enrolled in pensions, right? And you'd have to opt out if you don't want it. So essentially, all of us, pretty much most of the UK adult population that is working, is a retail shareholder. And then there is that 11% that I mentioned earlier, that basically holds shares directly through a registrar, or most likely now through nominee platforms who, in my opinion, have done such a fantastic job of democratizing the buying and selling of shares. We think and remember, first and foremost, we are all retail shareholders. Our brothers, our sisters, our kids, our cousins, etc., our parents, our grandparents, they're all retail shareholders. And if we remember that, we have each other's backs. So especially at a time like now, where the Trump dump, is happening, where we've had years now of institutional outflow, we've had the Brexit reckoning. It's now time to think outside of the box and be radical in a responsible way about the solutions that we undertake to basically fix our problems. And the theme of this discussion is actually about representation. So we have Rachel Reeves here on the right for a reason, because I wrote to her a letter which turned out to be 9 pages long. I am doing a PhD in stakeholder capitalism and engagement and alternative investing strategy. So all the things that I say or promote in my content is actually backed up by research, because that's what I'm doing. And it's also backed up by practice. So basically, in this letter, we are calling strongly for direct retail shareholders to be represented at the table, including in task forces like the Capital Markets Industry Task Force, or CMIT, which basically are meant to have representatives of capital markets. And guess what? Retail shareholders, direct retail shareholders, DIY retail shareholders, are an important participant of capital markets. And what we think is best for us is not necessarily what the institutions who want to speak for us think is best for us. So it would be extremely important and urgent to ensure that direct retail is always represented and included in all decisions that will affect our future. So investor relations, as it stands today, is no longer fit for purpose because it prioritizes institutional investors. Essentially, today's investor relations is exclusive. It focuses largely on institutions. I would have had a much easier time if, in my engagement with companies and asking them to consider undertaking retail shareholder engagement, and if they said yes, but essentially this mindset of institutions know best, institutions are better than retail. Arguably, it's easier to manage institutions because you're dealing with fund managers and the corporate governance team for proxy voting rather than a disparate amount of people. But just remember that there are many examples of retail shareholders essentially helping many companies and markets succeed. So even Tesla, which I use as an example, not because of Elon Musk necessarily, but because of the base of 45% of the issued share capital of Tesla being owned by individual investors. And as we have seen time and time again, those retail shareholders will die in a ditch for Elon Musk, or at minimum, they will vote in favor of his $54 billion remuneration. So why do they do that? Why do they have so much loyalty to Elon? Well, number one, Elon talks to them, not just in formal SEC regulated ways, as we know, but he also engages with them, one-to-one, or through his X account, and certainly through his many alternative media podcasts, like with Joe Rogan. And then also because of the businesses he has run, or he runs, particularly Tesla, many of these people have made money from his endeavors. And so they continue to back him because they believe that he actually helps them move up the financial ladder. I'm not saying to copy them at all, certainly not. To copy Elon, certainly not. But there's so many examples, like Berkshire Hathaway, 40,000 people, including celebrities like Glenn Close, etc., queuing for hours to attend their weekend-long AGM festival. How amazing is that? The buzz, like it's a dream of mine to attend a Berkshire Hathaway AGM one day, and how fascinating that would be. But like you see already the mindset, these people, they're so excited to just have a place at this AGM to engage with one another, and of course, to hear from the great Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. Oh, okay, yes, previously Charlie Munger, but you know, how fascinating is that? Even NVIDIA, 35% of their issued share capital or thereabouts is retail, which is incredible. MicroStrategy is another hot one. Palantir, Coinbase, you know, the list goes on. And actually, the UK, I get told so many times that the UK actually needs to have companies that people will be interested in investing in and actually make something. Yeah, that's true. But then at the same time, the UK still has some interesting companies with amazing history and legacy. But the kids today, if you ask a 21-year-old, name me 3 UK listed companies, they probably will struggle because it's just not talked about as much, or it's not as visible. But if you ask that same kid, name me 3 US companies that are listed on the NASDAQ, they would be able to name that easily. Apple, Microsoft, Tesla. So, and they will continue, and longer and longer. So here in the UK, actually, because personally for me, I fell into a rabbit hole last year, and I'm so glad I did. So for about 8 months of last year, I went from realizing, gosh, I've been theorizing myself as a, you know, being a retail shareholder, having spent most of my time with my investment being held in mutual funds, and then realizing actually that doesn't really teach me as much as I can learn. And so then I decided to figure out, where are these Gen Zs and millennials hanging out and investing? And I found them. They're on YouTube. They're on Trading 212, chatting with one another. And one of the people that they're chatting with, they're on Robinhood. They're on eToro. They are on X. They are everywhere. They are taking control of their lives. And they are just everyday people. And I took a video of this amazing chat about, I think there's a thread of like 3,000 responses of what people who are trading and investing in Trading 212 do for a living. So basically, it's just so fascinating to see the long list of people that are young, but actually all age groups, but just want to take financial control of their future. So basically, I ended up living in that world, and I also learned about crypto and the whole, wow, degen space and the high risk trading that these guys make. And golly, you know, these guys, they look like they're 10 or whatever. You might think, oh, who's this hoodied, homeless looking kid? That 23-year-old kid that we're just mentioning is worth 20 million pounds, and went from being like a checkout boy at a supermarket at 16 in Sweden, and is now, you know, a top crypto analyst in his area, and makes loads of money doing YouTube videos, having sponsorships as a influencer, you know, getting paid to attend and speak at conventions, and has also made, you know, millions of pounds over 2 or 3 Bitcoin cycles. And you know, for them, for these degens, they want to make £1 million, not in 17 years like the first ISA millionaire here in the UK did. They want to do that in 17 days or 17 weeks or 17 months. But you get my point. But you know, those guys too, they need to learn. They need to be financially literate too, and they will need to diversify. Many of them are already getting exhausted from the grind of crypto, and basically are looking into real world assets. So many of them will never let go of Bitcoin. And actually, you know, the whole diamond hand thing, that's like bollocks now. People know that you should never just like hodl forever. But Bitcoin, the view here is that one day it will reach $1 million per Bitcoin, and that you need at least 0.1 Bitcoin to set you up for life. Anyway, that's one thinking. But these guys are starting to get tired, and they're realizing, okay, I have I don't know, my Bugatti, or oh my gosh, I don't even know car, like the anyway. So one of her Gen Z millennials, he knows all these cars and like their watches, and then they they want to do other things. So basically, they also could be interested in UK capital markets. So we've got loads of opportunities here for cross-pollination, for learning from one another, and especially from engaging with one another. So I have to do a call now, but I will continue the rest of the thinking in my next session.